Hello. It's been a while, at least for you guys who are like watching concurrently to this. We just taken a 2 week break for AP testing, and now we're back. So, today we're going to be covering the years 800 through 1200 CE. And so this is going to be a period of global change, though every period is one. So, well, without further ado, I am going to go on. Right. So yeah, since it's been a while, at least for me, uh, here's just like some things for you to think about. I can't really ask you this since you're watching a video, but um, what's the most important thing, or most interesting thing you've learned about in the past 4 weeks? What's the most important part of history? And what do you want me to talk about? So this is kind of weird since I'm like telling you about this afterwards. But during the lecture, the original lecture, there was a lot of interest in the Americas and also just states that we have not covered yet. Obviously, I can't change that for this presentation, but rest assured, I think post 1450, we're going to be starting to like really expand outwards. I do apologize that we've had so much focus on, well, the Mediterranean, northern India, and China. Like those have been our three main places. But it's mainly due to like a lack of time. We can't really cover that like everything um, in the like really short amount of time that we have here. But yeah, we're definitely going to start really expanding outwards. This might mean we're going to start like neglect these three places that we've placed so much emphasis on. But yeah, I do think it's worth it to have a more global perspective about history. Next slide. Oh, wait. So here's some review. So since the beginning of humanity, well, 200,000 years ago, 95% of our existence as Homo sapiens has been as, well, hunter gatherers. Meanwhile, well, not meanwhile, but after a very long time, in the 10,000s BC, that's when we get the agricultural revolution, where, well, it's in the name. You start having a lot of agriculture, which means that now, since there's more food and more stable supply of food, that means that you have a lot more food surplus. And a surplus means that you can supply people who aren't farmers, and that now you can really, really start to divide labor in society. That's how we get social classes and gender norms, and especially, well, religion, or most controversially, I suppose. So so yeah, here are some big trends. So over the last 4 weeks, we saw the rise and fall of pretty major civilizations. Um, hmm. So um, just think about like what kind of factors were involved in these rises and falls. So specifically in the falls, which I focused a lot about on in the weeks where we talked about the Bronze Age collapse and on, well, the fall of the Western Roman Empire. Well, there are a lot of similar factors. There's always, crop failure. That is always the big one, and that's the one that one of the students mentioned, and which made me very happy. Uh, and yeah, as well, like corruption, all those kinds of things. But in our case, it was mainly crop failure that we've talked about. We also talked about the concentration of wealth and power around bodies of water. So rivers in, the Yellow River and the Yangtze River in China, and as well as, well, river valleys in, well, Mesopotamia and in Egypt. And this is where, well, river valleys, because you have a steady supply of water, and where you can have a consistent supply of, well, nutrients. That means that you get this is probably the best place to have an agricultural society. But then outside of that, as these societies expand outwards and it goes, and human civilization goes just beyond the river valleys, we get to the massive oceans as well as the Mediterranean Sea that become, well, locuses, or, well, centers of power. So for example, I spent far too much time on this map during our Rome, well, the part about Rome, as, well, sea trade is far, far easier than land trade. If you remember, when we were talking about the Roman Empire, even using those really famous Roman roads um, the price of a wagon of grain gets doubled every 50 miles that you travel. 50 miles, like, which is, really not that much at all. And the reason behind this is because, well, one, the transport that you're using, so like horses, donkeys, whatever, uh, well, it eats the grain. But then also another thing is just it's very slow. So being able to have this kind of, well, basin of sea power, or, well, this basin through which you can conduct sea trade, makes communication and trade and just general transport is much, much easier. And you can also see this in the Indian Ocean, which is going to be the main center of power, or main center of economic gravity for the world up until, well, Columbus. But I'm going to get into that later. So here's just a tour of the world in 800 CE. This map is from 750, but let's just pretend. So meanwhile, in Japan, you can see, well, this is the beginning of the Heian period in Japan, which we'll be getting into. Meanwhile, in China is the Song dynasty, where, oh, sorry. Right now, it's still the Tang dynasty, but they will collapse and be replaced by the Song soon. Sorry, but right now, in China, it's the Tang dynasty, which is, well, it's the center of the world, as in the Middle Kingdom. Yeah, and I know I say lots of centers of the world, but um, the trade routes that China has are basically like culturally and religiously tying half of the entire continent together. In India, we have the Gupta Empire, but not really anymore, since by 800 the Gupta Empire has collapsed. But the Chola in the south, the trading empire, are still going on very strong. Because, well, the Chola they just keep going. At this point, most of the world's trade travels through the Indian Ocean, and in the west, we have the Caliphate, this Islamic mega empire that dominates the world from Spain to Afghanistan. And so, well, for this is going to be incredibly powerful, but it's also going to start, well, decaying from the inside. We also have the Roman Empire right here. It's still there, surprisingly, and it's holding its ground against, well, the much, much stronger Caliphate. In Western Europe, we have a relatively fractured political identity, but it's also not doing too badly for itself. Then, for places we have not really looked enough at, well, it's down here in the south. In Ethiopia, there is a massive Christian community that's been, well, cut off from the rest of Christianity. Well, at this point, it's Ghana. Well, there is a thriving state that is deriving a lot of its income off of trans-Saharan trade, though we're getting into Ghana later. Meanwhile, and along the Andes in South America, there is an incredibly hardy civilization that's just beginning to develop. We're not really going to cover it yet, but well, keep in mind that, like, this civilization down here is something that really should not exist, and it's actually incredibly impressive that it does, considering that the mountains are not the most hospitable place to have a civilization. Um, Meanwhile, in Central America, we have the Maya, who are beginning, or not beginning, they're really declining at this point. We're going to get into the Maya, well, to this week. But we're going to start off back in the east with Heian, Japan. You probably saw the cameo of the Heian period last week. So let's go on to the next slide. So here's just where Japan is. So Heian, Japan is kind of a very nice place to be. Japan is rich, it's at peace, so that means that the capital at Heian is going to become a place where there's a lot of art. And so the nobility here is taking advantage of all that peace, and it's starting to spend all of its time on art. Well, not necessarily all, but like there's a pretty much all of it. And that means that, well, that's going to have some issues later on. But during the Heian period, we also have the Tale of Genji, which is the world's first novel, and it is a saucy romance novel. And This is also when Japanese culture really starts to become independent of Chinese culture. As well, as you can probably remember from last week where I talked about Land of the Rising Sun and the whole naming convention behind Nihon. Um, well, before this, China had largely dominated Japanese culture. It will continue to do so, but this is when you see like the first forming of a very rich Japanese tradition. So if you remember the nobles spending all of their time on art, that means that well, the nobles were the government. So who's going to do everything else? So the answer for that lies in local strong people, as in locals with weapons. These are the daimyo down here, and they have armies of samurai warriors, or just at this point mainly just like gangs. None of these armies are larger than like 1,000 soldiers. And so, but the thing is, the central government is all distracted. So these local leaders start going like, okay, just send taxes to us and we'll manage everything for you. Don't bother with the government because they're not doing anything helpful. So, well, yeah, people do because, well, these local lords do want to help improve their own territories. They become extremely rich. They very much are, they're very similar to the feudal lords in Western Europe. And, well, I think that the Heian period might be an example of the pen being less mighty than the sword, where you have all these people who are, writing books, things like that. But then you have all of these guys with swords and bows, and I wonder really who's going to come out on top here. This is the period where we see at the end of the Heian is where we see the rise of the shogunate. And so these shoguns are military dictators, as in like military, well, they're generals, and they start ruling Japan instead of the emperor. The whole reason behind this is because, well, they have armies, the emperor doesn't. And they also have the support of the large landowners, the daimyo. Oh, okay. But the thing is, the shoguns do not become emperor. The emperors are still around, and they'll be in the background. They won't have very much power, but they will, eventually the emperors will strike back. Oh god, that's terrible. In around 700 years. So next we're going to go a bit further west to Song China. So if you remember last time we were talking about the Tong, but then the Song replaced the Tong. And so Song China is a pretty great time for China, for the most part, where it's largely continuing that tradition of the Tong being pretty great and the Song being pretty great. And so what happens is that the Song, with their extreme riches due to controlling China, means that they're going to advance very quickly. They're going to improve agriculture, which means with more agriculture, that's more food. With more food, that means a bigger population. And with more people, that means more cities. And what more cities lead to is more trade. So let's think about this. The primary trading city is Hangzhou in southeastern China. And it is, well, if you guys are familiar with Marco Polo or Ibn Battuta, they both actually come to Hangzhou, and they call it the greatest city in the world because, well, it is massive and it has communities of traders from all over Eurasia, or Afro-Eurasia, as in Africa, Europe, and Asia. Also, during this time, there are plenty of innovations, like very, very important innovations. So, there's printing. Without the printing, we wouldn't have the office, and that'd be very sad. There's also paper money. I'm going to continue the office joke here. In Well, there's also porcelain, which is very valuable. You can probably tell when people say that they have china when they're referring to porcelain, as well as tea, because he doesn't love tea. For all you Avatar fans out there, um, Uncle Iroh. And there's also the compass, and that's what I really want to talk about because with the compass, this makes it very nice and very easy for you to tell where you are when you're at sea. because, well, there aren't exactly very many landmarks. There isn't land at sea. So you really need to be able to tell where you are and where you're going. And the compass is very crucial to being able to tell you that, especially on cloudy nights when you can't see the stars. At this point, there's also gunpowder. We already talked about gunpowder when we talked about the tongue, but well, the Song are going to start turning this gunpowder from fireworks to rockets and then eventually to guns. So, oh gosh. So in Song China, there's also, well, it follows the same path as every other dynasty because the Song eventually they become corrupt. That means the army gets less effective since, well, they're not getting paid really, or if they're getting paid, they're not getting managed or led very well. That means that these external tribes, such as the Jurchens, and well, first the Jurchens and then the Mongols, are going to invade, and they're going to beat the Song. At least the Mongols are, and well, you know, the Song actually do a pretty good job of holding off the Mongols, but well, they're the Mongols. You can't really stand up against them. We're going to be talking about the Mongols, though, mainly after we get through 1200. This is really also stuff that happens after 1200. So China is a hegemonic power. So I don't, yeah, the kids didn't really know what a hegemon is, but so a hegemon in terms of ancient Greece was when one city state started being able to hold power over a bunch of other city states. It didn't like control them directly, like there weren't like, I don't know, city state governors, but what there were just there's just a lot of influence. So in this case, whenever China wants something, say that China doesn't want anyone to trade with these, say, like tribes in the north, then, well, Korea, Japan, and Vietnam aren't going to trade with the tribes in the north. When China claps, these countries jump. So in Vietnam, that's, I guess, the least exposed to Chinese power. This is Sinification, as in, well, you guys have heard of like Sino-Japanese War. That's a war between China and Japan. Well, Sino is like what we use as like a, you know, I'm just blanking out on what it's called, but just to describe something that's Chinese. So in Vietnam, there's the least exposure to Chinese power. Like, China is very patriarchal, but in Vietnam, there's more equality for women. China is very decentralized, but Vietnam is not centralized. You can kind of see this in the fact that Vietnam is largely composed of jungles, which are very hard to navigate for, say, Chinese armies. Um, in Japan, there's a much more enthusiastic adoption of Chinese culture. If you remember, like Land of the Rising Sun, they adopt Chinese religion. They try to adopt Chinese political system, and they also do draw a lot of influences from China, even during the Heian period, as far as literature goes. They also, but at the same time, though, in Japan, what happens is what's called a religious syncretism, where Buddhism mixes with the traditional religion of Japan, with the Shinto religion, that creates, well, a distinctly Japanese Shinto Buddhism. Um, I'm not going to talk about the feudal system, really. Oh. And meanwhile, in Korea, this time Korea is one country, not two. It has a land border with China, so you can probably tell that it's going to be the closest tied to China, where they're going to, adopt a lot of Chinese traditions and political systems and, writing. Heading to the southwest, let's talk about the Indian Ocean and Indian Ocean trade. So, the Indian Ocean is going to be I'm beating a dead horse here, but it's the economic center of gravity of the world, where most of the world's trade occurs up until Christopher Columbus sails the ocean blue in 1492. And so the reason why this is so important is because, well, one, all these states that are very rich that border it, but also two, are the monsoons. Because let's say that you are a merchant from Yemen, so right here. Well, you know when you should head to India, for example, because you know for that from April to September, the winds can bring you pretty quickly to India, and then you know that you can also expect a fairly easy return trip in November through February, because that's when the winds go backwards. This is extremely consistent. So if you're a trader, this is really good because one, you're getting where you want to go faster, but then two, that predictability means that you can be sure that you're actually going to make money off of this, which is very important. And more importantly, you're going to be sure that you won't die, which is great. I guess you're not entirely sure, considering that you're traveling over the open ocean, but you can be more sure at least. Also, for you guys who are more interested in wanting to see some new states, let's talk a bit about the Swahili city-states in East Africa. These states are, if you think about the Greek city-states, they're similar, where each of these is going to be a very rich state that's pretty devoted to being able to make as much money as they can off of trade. And then that means that they are going to be incredibly wealthy. Also, the Swahili city-states are going to get a lot of influence from the Islamic world. And in East Africa, there's going to be a lot of Muslim influence. Yeah, I talked about the monsoons. So, East Africa is in this. It's just not part of this map. But it's also connected with the Silk Road. If you remember the Han from a couple of weeks ago, where they're starting to found the Silk Road, that's also another way for east-west trade, but it's overland. And so it's the Indian Ocean trade route and the Silk Road, they kind of work in tandem with one another. I'm not going to really get into all of the things that get into this, but just suffice to say that China and India, as well as everywhere, just everywhere involved, has a lot of things that are very valuable. And it's this will eventually be why Christopher Columbus does sail the ocean blue, because he really wants to get into all of these supplies of valuable things on these Indian Ocean trade routes. You guys have probably heard that Christopher Columbus thought that he was in India, so that's why they called them Indians. I don't remember if that's actually true, but that gives the general idea that Christopher Columbus wanted to get into India. But that is 200 years later. Later on. Okay, so I think what's more important, or as important, as the goods that travel along the Indian Ocean are the religions. So, what do you think is the largest Muslim country in the world? Let's give you 10 seconds to think about that. Well, okay. It's Indonesia down here, which is very far away from the traditional Muslim world. 225 million Muslims. That means that, how did it get there? And so the way that it got there was through, this Indian Ocean trade routes, because there are tons of Muslim travelers who are taking full advantage of the Indian Ocean to get rich, and as they get rich, they also spread Muslim or Islam east. Meanwhile, you can also see that from China, that Buddhism is spreading everywhere, mainly in East Asia, through a combination of overland and sea trade routes. And this results in religious syncretism. I talked about this with Shinto Buddhism in Japan, as well as Christmas in way, way, way back. And so this, if you just to jog your memory, religious syncretism is the blending of religions. Syncretism is just blending. So for an example of this, you can see Sufi Islam in this area. One of you guys in the live lecture actually drew some very nice, helpful circles here. But this is a combination of Islamic belief, as in one God, Semitic. With the 4 pillars and all that, or 5 pillars. Gosh. Anyways, and Hindu worship, because Hinduism is very focused on experiencing God, and Sufi Islam is also like that. There's a very big emphasis on experiencing God personally. Uh, Sufis will be very influential later on. So next we're going to go further west to Christianity, well, the Christian and Muslim worlds. So, well, here they are. So, I mean, maybe I should draw an extra circle around here for the Muslim world. But I'm just trying to think of, well, Dar al-Islam, the Caliphate, and, well, Christian Europe. So, sorry. Oh, gosh, my throat. Anyways, so if you remember the Rise of Islam lecture from 3 weeks ago, we saw the rise of the Caliphate, the big Islamic mega empire. And because they're tied to this Indian Ocean trade route, that means that you can that they really want to encourage that trade. They also have a lot of money then in order to encourage scholarship. And the reason why scholarship is so important is because, well, if you encourage medicine, that improves the chances that you don't die, which is great. Also, it improves your navigation skills through astronomy, as well, astronomy might not seem so useful to us today, but let's think about this. If you're at sea and you don't have a compass, or if your compass breaks or gets stolen, something like that, how are you going to see where you are? And the way you do that is through astronomy. You look up at the stars, and from there you can kind of tell where you are and where you're going. So it's very useful for traders. Also through mathematics. If you guys are familiar with Arabic numerals, as in, these 10, you can probably tell they're Arabic numerals. The thing is, though, is that this is also a product of the Indian Ocean trade routes, as the Arabs actually called these numerals Hindu numerals because they got those from, well, India along the trade routes, while, adapting to them somewhat. Also, do you guys know what an empire? Oh, do you know what an empire is? I'll just give you some time. So when I say empire, you probably think of maybe Star Wars. Maybe I'm just too nerdy. But anyways, Star Wars is big empire that has a leader, an emperor, and a very strong, powerful army or things like that. But I'm going to define an empire using, well, a kind of weird 20th century definition that defines empire as one nation, or I guess one group of people, ruling over a bunch of other groups of people. So in this case, the Caliphate, the Islamic Empire, is that ruling group are the Arabs, the Bedouins, while they rule over Iranians, Christians, Moors, Spaniards, Armenians, etc. And so, well, each one of these groups has a lot of things to offer, and the caliphs generally try to, make full use of that. So I talked about Iranianization 3 weeks ago, sorry. And for that one, I made a big deal out of Iranian bureaucracy, because Iranian bureaucracy, if you remember, survives literally everything. It's extremely useful for governing an empire this big. They also provide a lot of, well, helpful technology. From the Christian communities is that, they start digging up all these old ancient Greek texts. Some are philosophical, but also a lot are medicinal. And this is what really helps the Islamic world develop really excellent medicine. Oh, it's okay. When I say excellent, though, I mean relative to the times, because, well, ancient medicine is not great. Most medicine in the world just really sucks up until you get to the 1860s. So when you see this big caliphate with its big, with its tons and tons of subject peoples, that this is going to be very hard to control. Think about this. If something happens in Spain, let's say that maybe some people in the north try to invade Spain, or try to invade Muslim Spain, and let's say they win. So then the Spanish governor has to go and send a call for help. But to get all the way to Baghdad, that can take weeks. It can potentially take months. Potentially, the messenger just doesn't get there at all because all the like pirates, bandits, and all those kinds of things. It's not going to be something you can govern very well in the days before. Well, cars, phones, radios, things like that. So what happens is, well, it's going to fracture. And so, you can see the Islamic world in 1000 is going to be much, much less unified. Though I guess the Fatimids in Egypt are going to be very powerful. I'll talk about Sunni Shia divide later. I know I kind of neglected it when I was talking about the rise of Islam, but time. So, I don't think y'all know what the steps are. The kids in the live lecture did not. So I'll just get to that first. So the steppes are this area of grassland across northern Eurasia. And, well, this place is not good for farming, but it's really good for grazing animals, such as horses. And, well, sheep, things like that. And so the people of the steppes are nomadic, meaning that they always travel everywhere to be able to find their food. And as part of being nomads, that means that you're going to really need to be able to protect yourself and to be able to protect, say, your like flock of sheep from being stolen by bandits, things like that. And also, it's going to be very, very chaotic because there are no real set borders, so people are going to constantly be moving around and stepping on each other's toes. That means that the steppes are going to be a very violent place. And because they're so violent, and because, well, it requires an incredible amount of toughness to survive there, is that people who come from the steppes are going to be pretty much natural soldiers. And that's what I'm trying to get at, because since they're natural soldiers who basically get through training just by living through the steppes, that means that they're very valuable. And so let's take a look at the caliphate. Because if you remember the caliphate, it was established by Bedouins, as in, desert nomads who are very fierce warriors, very tough, very similar to the steppe tribes. But then now it's being exposed to a lot of this wealth, and it's much easier to just settle down, be a farmer. And, well, that lifestyle though doesn't produce great soldiers. So the caliphate or the caliphs find it much easier to just start recruiting soldiers from the steppes in order to fight their wars, which means that the actual Arab ruling class is going to be getting worse and worse at fighting, though there are going to still be very substantial numbers of Bedouins and Bedouin soldiers, and the traditional Bedouin soldiers. But then that also means that, like the samurai in Japan, the soldiers of the steppes are going to gradually take over the military, and then once they're in control of the military, they're going to start taking over the government. This is what's called the Seljuk Empire. So, hey, look, Seljuks. Let's go on to Rome. So, well, yeah. Rome is still around, which might come as a surprise to some of you. But at this point, it's just down to mainly Greece, bits of Turkey. And it's fighting bits of Turkey, haha. But anyways, it's fighting for survival against, the caliphate, though in this case it's going to be the Seljuks, and against the steppe tribes in the north. And that means that it's going to really be in need of a lot of help, considering that it's fighting the caliphate, the biggest empire in the world at the point. So what they do, or at least what the emperor does, is he thinks, what if I just get a bunch of people to help me and fight these people, and I'll just tell them that it's because it's good, it's for a religion. What's a lot of people who think that they need salvation. Okay, so it's what if I just told a bunch of people that if they go help me fight the Muslims, that they get to go to heaven? Because, if you guys are familiar with the idea of the Ten Commandments and thou shalt not kill, every soldier in, the Christian empire, Christian kingdoms in the West, is kind of violating that. So to save their souls, what if you just added a little asterisk to thou shalt not kill, and make it, except for when the emperor really wants you to go fight against some people who don't believe the same things as you. And so, Emperor Alexius of the Romans calls his buddy the Pope. Will send a message to his buddy the Pope and asks for a bit of help. So the Pope is like, sure, guys, I really want to just, help unify the Christian kingdoms. So what if we all just turn them against fighting the Muslims? The First Crusade goes very well. Well, yeah, these are the Crusades, and they conquer the Holy Land, as in, the place where Jesus is born. It's also the place where, the Israelites live for Jews, so it's very holy to them, and I guess to Christians too, since the Christians have the Old Testament. And it's also very religiously significant to the Muslims. And so, it's very valuable then, mainly from a religious perspective. And so, the Crusades occur. There's many Crusades. Most of them fail, though, and one of them actually goes so badly that it results in the Crusaders not helping the Romans out, but actually burning down the Roman capital city, which is, great job, guys. Congratulations for really sucking at this. And this leads to the establishment of the Crusader states. You can probably tell what they are, states for Crusaders. And so they're the reason why this is important, because the Crusades aren't just wars. The Crusaders, even though they spent a lot of time killing people, also spent a lot of time trading with Muslims, since, trade is going to be the name of the game for this lecture. And this is how Europe manages to reconnect with the Indian Ocean world, as well as with, the whole Muslim world, which is going to be, very helpful. And this is actually going to, actually accidentally end up, or ironically, bringing up Muslims and Christians closer together, which is just touching, even though they are still killing each other. This picture should not be here. But anyways, so with medieval Europe, at the time, it's divided between, relatively small states, at least small compared to the old Roman Empire. And it's going to be a very agriculturally based economy. Since, if you remember, the Romans, they had a lot of their economy based around, the Mediterranean and that kind of sea trade. But the medieval Europe or medieval Western Europe isn't based around the Mediterranean nearly as much. This is Northern Europe, and this is the first time that Northern Europe is really coming into our story. There's not any safe Mediterranean basin here, so sea trade is going to be much less important. And also, importantly though, for the way this economy works, is that it's just there are none of the old cities that were all dedicated to producing one kind of thing. There wasn't that kind of specialization anymore. Without the Romans. So what happens is that power becomes decentralized, as in it becomes very similar to the daimyo in Japan, or almost like steppe warriors in the caliphate, where there's going to be a local lord or a local rich guy who has a bunch of soldiers that he can afford to pay, and he tells you, let's say you're a farmer, he comes and tells you, if you give me, say, 30% of your grain, I'll make sure that you don't lose 100% of your grain, either to my guys looting your town and burning down your village, or to someone else looting your town and burning down your village. So it's kind of like protection money. It's very much like a gang. And so at this point, as a result, most people become peasants and serfs. So a serf is someone who cannot leave the land on which they were born. They have to spend their entire lives in the same 20-mile radius. It's basically coronavirus, only it's basically social distancing, only it's generations. Medieval Europe is also though it's also not as bad as it appears in pop culture. Have you guys? I can't even ask you questions because this is a video. But if you're familiar with Monty Python and the Holy Grail, there's a part where there's all these peasants who are smearing dirt all over their faces, and they're covered in crap and dirt and mud, and they're all just filthy. And no one is like that. Nobody wants to be like that. it's still relatively clean, and community life is, well, it's like anything else, and it's actually relatively festive because everyone likes parties except for, I guess, introverts. And all, but then the thing is, like, what's going to happen is that because of serfdom, everyone's going to be related to each other, and everyone's grown up with each other and knows each other. So it's all very, communal. There's a very strong sense of a community in medieval Europe, and it's very, local, since, well, no one's traveling except for merchants. Also, what I do want to know is that medieval Europe is not as violent as pop culture portrays it as. War is not the norm usually, at least for most places. Not like um, war is not the primary occupation of most people. Farming is. So another important part of understanding, well, medieval Europe is the church. Because if you remember the Roman Empire, the Roman emperors have a lot of control over what Christianity says and does. It's a state religion. But, well, the Western Roman Empire is gone. The state religion kind of format still stays in the East with that Roman Empire. But, well, in the West, Catholicism, Western Christianity, is now just unleashed to do its own thing. That means that it's going to be super powerful. Because, maybe, let's say you have two people who are telling you to follow what they're going to say. Let's say one person is the king, and they say, follow me because I have armies, and I have, well, taxes, and, well, I'm from a cool family or whatever. But then look at the church, because the church also has armies. It also has taxes, but what it also has is that it's literally God coming down to talk to you. So are you going to follow this guy, or are you going to follow, well, God? So a lot of places, they become theocracies. They're still Christian kingdoms, but there are going to be large parts of these kingdoms that are ruled directly by the church, that where all the taxes go to the church. This is why churches today are tax-free, are tax-free. And they're going to use those taxes, one, on the armies, but then two, on building all these massive, beautiful cathedrals, which are going to be Christian. Also, they're going to be using that on books and everything, because the church is how we get basically all the books and art of medieval Europe. If you ever go to Europe, or if you've been to Europe, you've probably noticed that there are cathedrals everywhere, and it's always crazy to think how did they pay for this? Well, the way they did that is because, well, it's very powerful and can collect taxes from a lot of people. Since this is dragging on, I'll try to make this short. But let's go to Africa, because we have neglected this. We have criminally neglected this over the past last while. So we're also still going to continue to neglect the South because not enough time. So in West Africa, we have Ghana, which is kind of like a loose confederation, as in it's a loose alliance of a bunch of local communities that unite under a king. And it's a very, very, decentralized, chill kind of thing, where the government doesn't actually have that much power, but what it does want for you to do is to pay tribute, as in, pay basically taxes to the government. But all these communities that form part of this confederation are going to be relatively independent. And so Ghana is actually very complicated, and where they have a system of laws that rivals pretty much anything seen in everywhere else. And they're also very rich, because Ghana is situated along the trans-Saharan trade routes. So, you trans-Sahara, as in it crosses the Sahara Desert. And this is because, well, Ghana and its successor Mali has a lot of gold, while in the north there's a lot of salt. And so let's think about why you need salt. Because if you live in a place that's very hot, such as Mali, you're gonna be sweating a lot, and your sweat has salt in it. You probably tasted your sweat before. So to replace that, you need salt. And so salt is very valuable. Gold is also very valuable. And so there's kind of like a trade that goes through there. There's also the slave trade because slavery is a big part of the medieval world. So another part that yeah, I talked about the spread of Islam or religions across trade routes, and well, Islam in West Africa is no different. Well, because well, there's all these merchants who are all Muslim, they're all rich, and you're like, okay, if you're a if you're a Malian king, maybe you're going to be like, okay, maybe these traders would give me a better deal if I converted to Islam. And so the ruling class of Mali converts to Islam. But Islam in Mali is very different from Islam in, say, Baghdad, because it blends with the local traditions. This is syncretism. And so, women in Mali, well, Muslim women in Mali are going to have much more freedom than, well, Muslim women in Baghdad. And there's also just like much, just generally much less restrictive in Mali. Okay, this is dragging on. Sorry, I've talked for probably way too long about this, but we're gonna finish this up with the Americas and the Maya. So this is where the Maya are. So we're neglecting most of North America, well, most of the Americas. So the Maya have been in existence for pretty much like for a large part of our narrative. Basically since like the end of the Olmecs from week one, and so although we're not really able to tell when exactly they started, but uh, the Maya are very excellent at agriculture and pottery, and also like writing as well as mathematics. You can see that in their extremely good architecture, as well as through their calendars. But let's just talk about the agriculture for a second. So part of the reason why the Mayan Empire collapses is because, or the Maya, it's not really a single empire. Um, the Maya civilization collapses is because, well, of their agriculture, because the Maya use their agricultural farm very, very intensively in order to support the growing population. If you remember the Bronze Age collapse, that leads to the soil becoming less and less nutritious over time. So plants are going to have fewer nutrients, and they're going to, well, not be able to grow as well. That causes a famine, and eventually, well, without food, the Maya civilization begins to collapse. It's also combined with like droughts and a bunch of other things. Think of like Bronze Age collapse level stuff. So the Maya are very similar to, say, like the Greek city states, where it's not really an empire. It's one city state event. Well, it's a bunch of city states that all like squabble with one another, and then one city state becomes a hegemon, where like when I talk about China, where it's more powerful than the others, so the others best do what it tells them to do. They also have, a extremely developed mathematics system or mathematical system. They also have an extremely advanced calendar. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the whole like apocalypse thing in 2012. Um, and the Maya have this had this system called the long count, where the Maya recognize that the Earth is old, the universe is old, and so they had their calendar actually has like a unit that means millions of years. Like I don't know what it's called. It's called X. It's like 1x equals, say, like 20 million years. Obviously, they didn't use this very much, but it's an interesting part of a calendar that really that really accounts for just how old the universe is. The Maya also sorry. Yeah, the Maya also have a very developed writing system with glyphs. You can tell like through this, and it's inscribed on buildings and steels. Which steels are steles. I'm not actually sure how to pronounce that. Which are like stones that you can draw on and write on, and like books called codices, which are, well, I mean, in a lot of cases, these are going to be law books, very similar to how Hammurabi's code was, put on steels and buildings and everything like that. Hammurabi's code being the first law system that's all the way back in I don't even remember, in like 2000 or 1000 BC. Jeez. Yeah, I honestly don't remember. But anyways, the Maya religion is also polytheistic, as in there's multiple gods that you have to keep like happy about you. This is animism. Animism is very vague and it pretty much applies to like every religion. But it's the belief where there is some like power that we can't see that can organize and animate the entire universe. As in the universe is like watching us. And so what you need to do is act in according to what the universe wants. And so if you don't do this, maybe you'll have a drought, like the drought that eventually wiped out Maya civilization. Or maybe you'd have an earthquake that, kills everyone in the city. So in like compared to what kinds of things they feared, uh, human sacrifice is not as, seems weirdly reasonable. I'm not saying that you should go out and sacrifice your neighbor, but human sacrifice, for one, is kind of like exaggerated as to like how common it was. It's mainly restricted to prisoners of war. But then two, human sacrifice is not actually that alien to I guess Western or Eastern civilization. Like we have records of human sacrifice in early China, as well as human sacrifice that's recorded like widespread throughout Western Europe and in Rome. So it is not as foreign or as insane as people typically, as historians typically regard it as. At the same time, though, do not sacrifice people. It is bad. So thank you for sitting through that. That is presentation for week 5, which is also the first week where I've actually finished the entire presentation. Thank you.